Like B said, my name is Emily Shelton, and I'm the Policy Outreach Director at Texas Impact. I've been here almost 3 years, and I was laying in bed last night and realized that this is my 4th legislative event, which makes me feel really old. So today I'm going to be talking for just a few minutes about immigration bills that have been filed this session. And there have been a lot filed. I think there's around 30 bills. Immigration is going to be one of the hot topics of the session, along with budget and redistricting. In fact, Governor Perry has already added sanctuary city legislation to his emergency items. And emergency items are priority items that legislators can consider in the first 60 days of the session. And so this could have an impact on some legislation, but I'll talk more about that later. But the central message is that immigration is going to be a big deal. So as people of faith, our beliefs, even our political beliefs, hopefully, are informed and framed by what we read in Scripture. So I have picked some verses that I think are representative about what the Bible says about immigration. The first one, love your neighbor as yourself. That is, I think, pretty self-explanatory. And while it can be really tempting to ask, well, who is my neighbor exactly? I think we've all heard the parable of the Good Samaritan plenty of times. The second verse is more specific to immigration issues. It says, when a foreigner resides in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as native born. Love them as yourself. So this is one of several Old Testament verses that are along those same veins. They're kind of all related to you were strangers in Egypt sort of verses. And I kind of think of it as God saying, hey guys, don't forget you were immigrants too. Don't be mean. So the third verse speaks to concerns that some people have about immigration. I've heard a lot of people argue that the Bible says we ought to follow the law, there's authority, we need to follow the rulers. But here's kind of another spin on that. It says, woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, to deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people, making widows their prey and robbing the fatherless. So there's that focus on unjust laws, and I would be so bold as to say that I think many of our immigration laws are unjust. As Methodists, we have this pretty cool thing called the social principles. How many of you have heard of the social principles? That's really good, because you're going to be passing them out to your legislators tomorrow. So if you're not familiar with them, tonight would be a good time to look them over. But they essentially serve as the church's official statement on a wide variety of issues. And this is, ta-da, the church's stance on immigration. I don't actually want to read the slide because Methodists tend to get a bit wordy and it can be tedious to read that. But basically, the church affirms that we are all members of that beloved community that we talked about last night. And that we all, regardless of national origin, have certain rights, access to employment, housing, healthcare, education, and freedom from social discrimination. But what do we say? Immigration is a really divisive and contentious issue. And maybe this also is bordering a little bit on heresy, but we know that living in this world is not as simple as Jesus made it sound. So over the summer, B and I had the chance to talk to a bunch of UMWs about what they thought about immigration issues, and a lot of them listed a lot of concerns that really kind of surprised me. I think there are some legitimate concerns that people have about immigration that weren't listed, and so they're on this next slide. The first one is border security. A lot of women expressed concern that we need to know who is coming into our country. The next is cultural differences. People are afraid that the culture of the United States, whatever that may be, will change. They're concerned about learning English, that immigrants won't learn English, and all those sorts of things. Next, drug trafficking, which is kind of similar to border security, but essentially we don't want drugs coming in and out of the country. Some women were afraid that illegal immigrants were taking our jobs, especially from low-wage workers, or if they weren't taking our jobs, they were pushing down wages. Some people worried that illegal immigration was unfair to legal immigrants. They wanted illegal immigrants to come in legally to get in line. Finally, they are worried about the cost of providing services. We really do have a $27 billion shortfall, and it really does cost money to educate people and to provide some level of health care for them. So those are some of the fears that people mentioned when we talked to them over the summer. So the main question that we are confronted with is, how do we reconcile our fears and concerns about immigration to God's call for justice and commandment to love? And I think this gets at the heart of what Cynthia was talking about last night. On the one hand, you have the idea of the blessed community with abundance, where everyone is essential and irreplaceable, even immigrants. And you have a trust in God that God will provide. On the other hand, you have all these concerns and fears that there's not enough money, that there's a second-class citizenship. It's just about fear, fear, fear. So I, believe it or not, don't know the answer to this question. Yeah, anytime. But this is what legislators will be struggling with over the next 6 months. And it is a question that we have to think about when we go and talk to our legislators as well. So, moving on. Legislators, and I guess most of us, agree that the immigration system in Texas needs to be reformed. But that's about where the consensus ends. There are two things to consider when talking about immigration in Texas. First, that immigration is a federal issue. So any proactive, comprehensive immigration reform can't be done in Texas. Texas does have limited power to pass proactive, comprehensive immigration reform, but at the state level, there is less that we can do, and most of the laws that we pass will be reactionary or kind of mischief-making. In the 82nd legislature, these are the kinds of bills that have been filed as of right now. There's been, like I said earlier, about 30 bills that have been filed, and they mostly fall into these categories. There's Arizona-style immigration. Are y'all all familiar with the SB 1070 that passed in Arizona in April? There are some bills that require reporting requirements from state agencies or schools. There are some bills that require small businesses or governmental entities to use EVerify. There are some English language bills. There are bills that infringe on the rights of children born to illegal immigrants. And then there are a lot of bills that don't really fit into any category, and I'll just briefly touch on those. Right now, it's too early in the session to categorically oppose any bill. We don't ever quite really know what's going to happen, and there can be amendments added that make bills worse or better. There can be slight language changes that change the whole thing. So right now, at this point in time, we're not saying that we oppose any particular bill. And it's important to be sophisticated when you're looking at any bill. And there are lots of different shades of gray. All right, Arizona-style immigration. Back in April, Arizona passed a law. It had three main components. The first was that it punished state officials for not fully enforcing federal immigration law. It made it a crime for illegal immigrants to be in the USA, and it required law enforcement officials to check immigration status. So the legislation that Texas has filed, there's all these different bills, and they all address either one or more of these different provisions. Texas Impact is has a lot of concerns with these bills. One, we're concerned that local law enforcement should not enforce civil federal law. We oppose taking already limited resources, and we just heard about how limited our resources are, and using them for things that are other than what they were intended for. The second point, we are really concerned about possible collateral damage to churches. If it becomes a crime, it would be a trespassing misdemeanor, I think specifically, for illegal immigrants to be in the United States, then it's possible that churches who serve immigrants could be charged with being an accomplice to a crime. So if that sort of thing happens, Texas Impact will fight very, very hard against that bill. We also, the third point, oppose things that are really just racism. I mentioned earlier that there is some subtlety in that. So some of these bills, I think House Bill 17 and 18, well, one of those two, I can't remember which one right now, requires law enforcement officials to check immigration status when they suspect someone of being illegal, which is, you know, you would suspect someone of being, this is racial profiling, you would suspect someone of being illegal by their skin color or by their accent. House Bill 183, on the other hand, by Bert Solomons, requires law enforcement officials to check immigration status within 48 hours of someone being arrested for a crime. That seems much more reasonable than on the suspicion of looking illegal. So that's some of the Arizona-style legislation that's been passed. There's a bunch of different versions, like I said, and so it's important to use discernment when you're looking at a specific bill. Oh, and I mentioned sanctuary cities also earlier. Are y'all familiar with sanctuary cities? Yes? So, no. Okay, sanctuary cities are cities, there's no legal definition in Texas, but they're cities where local law enforcement doesn't enforce federal immigration law. So Rick Perry has said that this is a big problem. When pressed, he didn't specify which cities were sanctuary cities, but he said it's a big problem, and so he's put this on emergency legislation, emergency items, which means legislators can address the issue within the first 60 days of the legislative session. So it's kind of on the fast track. The second category of bills is reporting requirements, and there are sort of two types. One, the first two, House Bill 21 and 608, require state agencies to report the direct and indirect costs of providing services to illegal immigrants. The second set requires school districts to collect citizenship information about their students. Again, Texas Impact is opposed to putting the burden of immigration enforcement on state agencies and on teachers. We think that that is the federal government's job, and the federal government should do that. Especially, again, with a $27 billion shortfall, we think that we shouldn't be spending a dime on anything that is not mission critical. The third set, I'm going to try to go a little bit faster now. I think I'm running out of time. The third set of bills is bills related to the EVerify program, which is a system used by employers to determine their employees' eligibility to work. There's, 6 different bills that require either businesses or government entities to use the program. There are a few technical problems with EVerify. One is that it has a kind of high rate of false positives, and secondly, employers can only access the database after they have already hired someone. So it gets a little complicated. You hire someone, then you check their status, and then you have, I think, up to 3 days to confirm their employment, essentially. But we are more concerned that it will prevent legal immigrants or citizens from applying for jobs, especially if they have family that's here illegally. Essentially, we're afraid that EVerify creates fear among the immigrant community, and we've already been talking a lot about fear today, and fear is not a good thing. So again, and then this last bill is brand new. I haven't had time to look at it very closely, but it's a bill, that one is House Bill 582 by Button, and it prohibits businesses that don't use EVerify from getting economic development subsidies. So the next category is English-only laws. There's a couple different kinds again. Some designate English as the official language, which is pretty much a symbolic move. I think it goes back to the Methodist social principles that state that everyone should be free from social discrimination. To me, this screams social discrimination. It's or the Big Brother tendencies that we talked about earlier, saying our language is better than yours. There's a second kind of bill that requires official acts to be performed in English, and then there's a third set that prohibit public funds from being used to print documents in a language other than English. So these are bills that make it harder for society to function smoothly. It's just creating a barrier for the process. And more importantly, it's not going to keep people from being immigrants. It's not going to teach people how to speak English. So while I certainly agree that speaking English is necessary to fully function in society, it perhaps is a better idea, I would argue, to put more money towards ESL classes or to build nonprofit capacity so that churches can teach ESL classes. I'm just going to take like 2 seconds and brag on UMC, my church, University Methodist. We just recently started a program where Sunday school class is using cooking classes to teach immigrant kids English. Look, cool idea. The fifth set of bills are all bills that infringe on American citizens' rights. House Bill 292 requires a parent's citizenship status to be put on birth certificates. Earlier we talked about the beloved community and how in a community you don't draw a line, and this bill would draw a line. House Bill 293 prohibits American children of illegal immigrants from receiving certain benefits. All right, so Leo Berman is a representative that's really known for his anti-immigration stance. So I called his office this summer and actually got Leo Berman himself on the phone, which is a pretty startling experience. I wasn't expecting it at all. But he then told me that he planned on filing a birthright citizenship bill, which would revoke the 14th Amendment, which grants automatic citizenship to anyone born in the US. So these are some of the bills that infringe upon Americans' rights. Texas Impact opposes states' intrusion into federal matters of citizenship. We don't think there should be any sort of second-class citizenship, and we oppose, especially when we have this giant budget deficit and so many other issues to worry about, we oppose taking up the legislature's time with grandstanding on issues that are clearly unconstitutional and issues that will just result in lawsuits, which are not cheap. So finally, I'm just going to skim through these bills. There's bills that don't really fit into any category. House Bill 177 and 197 requires legal presence to get a driver's license, occupational license, and then there's other certain types of licenses. House Bill 474 prevents illegal immigrants from receiving benefits, certain benefits. House Bill 303, also another bill by Berman, creates an 8% surcharge on wire transfers from the US to Mexico, South or Central America. And then House Bill 294 prohibits illegal immigrants from bringing a claim to court. And I think a lot of you will be interested in House Bill 464. Texas has its own version of the DREAM Act that allows, with certain constraints, students who are brought to the US when they were children illegally, it allows them to claim Texas residency so they can pay in-state tuition, which is really important for educating our workforce. Again, these are a lot of bills, and In these bills, there are a lot of ideas that Texas Impact opposes. Again, though, there are a lot of nuances. And while it's unlikely that we would ever support any of these bills, it's important to realize that some legislators, when they file these sorts of bills, are addressing what they perceive to be real problems. They're reacting to angry constituents and really just trying to do their best. On the other hand, you have some legislators who are acting out of fear, anger, and hatred. This is really kind of walking a tightrope, and I think that's important to keep in mind. One last thing. Immigration is an issue that evokes a lot of fear from a lot of people. It's complicated, it's nuanced, and sometimes there isn't a right answer. But as people of faith, we know that Jesus' most oft-repeated commandment is do not fear. And so I just wanted to leave you with this final thought from 1 John. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear.